Every time I see a player enter the transfer portal, when I go on social media, there's always a lot of people out there who get riled up in the comment section saying, oh, the transfer portal and NIL have ruined college football. These players don't want to fight for their spots anymore. They only want the money. And that leads me to this question. You know, ever since the transfer portal and the NIL era have really started to kick off in college football, has it made this sport better or has it made it a lot worse? Now, a lot of people that I've talked to on this matter feel like the transfer portal has done more good for college football than it has bad. And when you look at what the transfer portal has done from a positive lens, first-year head coaches now can hit the portal and build their program up a lot faster than what they have been able to previous years before the transfer portal really became a thing. Look at all the success that Lincoln Riley, Brian Kelly, and Mel Tucker had really early on with their new programs. You know, Brian Kelly hit the portal hard his first year at LSU, got Jaden Daniels, a couple of other great players, and they had a really surprising season year one under him. Same thing with Lincoln Riley. Year one at USC, they won 11 games. You got Caleb Williams out the transfer portal and a lot of other good players on that side of the football. And then same thing with Mel Tucker. Now, another thing that the portal allows you to do and why coaches that just arrive on the scene to a new program are able to hit the ground running so fast is that the transfer portal is really good at filling needs that need to be addressed immediately. Let's say you're a team like Ohio State and Alabama, and the only needs that you have are at running back, wide receiver, and cornerback. Well, you can hit the portal, get a good corner, get a good running back, and that can be it. So the portal allows you to address needs a lot faster versus having to wait 3 to 4 years via recruiting to develop a position that you struggled in previous years. Now, the teams that struggle to recruit at a highly consistent level, such as UCLA and Ole Miss, they've been large beneficiaries of the transfer portal. You see, Chip Kelly, we know this dude doesn't like to recruit, but he's been able to go into the portal and get guys such as a Jake Bobo and Zach Charbonnet, and he's been able to put together some 7-8 seasons at UCLA. Ole Miss, they recruit way better than UCLA, but they don't recruit as good as schools such as Georgia, Alabama, and LSU. And they possibly never will, at least at a consistent level. So if you're Lane Kiffin, you can go into the portal and you can mix in a couple of transfer portal guys that have 3-4 years of eligibility left. You can bring them in, develop them, and then you mix that in with the recruits that you get from bringing in top 20, fringe top 15 recruiting classes. And around 2-3 years after that, you could potentially have a team that's good enough to win the SEC. Based on how good of a coach Lane Kiffin is. Same thing happened with Florida State. Take them, for example. When Mike Norvell got there, he got Jordan Travis out of the transfer portal, who a lot of people forget, he started his college football career out at Louisville. He transfers to Florida State. He's in the program for a couple of years. They develop him, and he turns into one of the best quarterbacks in college football. Same thing with wide receiver Johnny Wilson. He was somebody who they brought in years ago. They developed him, and he was one of the better wide receivers in the ACC this past season. When you're a team that doesn't recruit at a high level, or you got a new head coach that's trying to get in there and hit the ground running, the transfer portal can be really effective with making sure that you can build up your squad as quick as possible. You don't have to wait 2 to 3 years to bring in good recruiting classes, develop those guys, and then be able to have success. The portal allows you, if you use it right, to have immediate success. And also, one thing that has made me a big fan of the portal is all of the tremendous stories that we get with these quarterbacks who don't pan out with their program the first time they decide to commit to a school out of high school, such as Michael Penix and Bo Nix. Michael Penix committed to Indiana. Bo Nix committed to Auburn. His dad played there, and neither one of their careers at their first schools went well. Bo Nix transfers to Oregon. Penix goes to Washington. And next thing you know, these are two of the best quarterbacks in all of college football. Jaden Daniels, he had a brief success his first season starting for Arizona State, and then you had some coaching mishaps that transpired. He transfers to LSU and he wins the Heisman Trophy. The majority of college football's best quarterbacks now have been acquired via the transfer portal. So if you got a head coach that has a really good offensive coordinator, or he's an offensive minded coach and he has some familiarity, or he knows how to properly evaluate quarterbacks in the portal, you can address the most important position in football via the portal, which is the quarterback position. And if you can get a good quarterback out of the transfer portal, let's say you got a little bit of a collective behind you that doesn't have no problem spending a couple of M's or maybe a couple $100,000 to get one of the top quarterbacks in the portal, you're set. And that's one thing that the NIL and the transfer portal have allowed teams to do, which is go ahead and get them a star quarterback. It's been a lot easier to find a great quarterback in college football now with the era of the transfer portal and NIL than what it used to be years ago. Years ago, you had to recruit a guy out of high school, develop him, and if he didn't work out, you was just asked out for the next couple of years until you could find another good quarterback out of high school, or you could get a grad transfer. Now with the transfer portal, if you have the right system and you're the right scheme fit for a guy in the portal, you can give a guy a little bit of a check, bring him in, and he can instantly make your team 4 or 5 games better. Look at Quinn Ewers. Quinn Ewers started out at Ohio State, hit the portal. He was highly touted. He goes to Texas with Steve Sarkisian, and all of a sudden, they're in the college football playoffs. 2 teams that are in the playoffs right now have transfer portal quarterbacks, and they're going to be facing off against each other in the semifinals. Look at Justin Fields, what he did for Ohio State. Ryan Day, early into his coaching tenure at Ohio State, got Justin Fields, who transferred from Georgia, and led them to a national championship appearance. So the transfer portal today, you look at how it's been used, and I think it's been used in a really positive light. Of course, you're going to have teams that go into the portal and they're going to be able to outbid a lot of other programs for some of the top players in the portal. But the transfer portal has allowed college football to be way less SEC dominant. If we didn't have the portal this year, there's a strong possibility that we could have had 2 SEC teams in the playoffs once again. If we didn't have the transfer portal and it wasn't as prevalent as what it is now, you wouldn't have Quinn Ewers on Texas and you wouldn't have Michael Penix playing for Washington. So I think when I'm looking at the transfer portal and the NIL from a broader scope, it's made college football a lot more better because it's been way more competitive. Look at the Pac-12. The majority of the Pac-12, if not all of their top quarterbacks this past season, were transfers. Cam Rising was a transfer from Texas. Shedeur was a transfer from Jackson State. DJ Uiagalelei was a transfer. Cam Ward was a transfer. Bo Nix, Michael Penix. So the transfer portal has led to better quarterback play. And you've had more competitive football in a lot of other conferences that haven't really been that great in the past. Shout out to my guy RS in the chat who says, watching you today from the Philippines. Shout out to you, man. When I'm looking at what has made the transfer portal and NIL, have a negative impact on college football and what you could say has made the sport worse, is that the elite programs, it's made it a lot easier for those schools to stay on top. People had told me that the transfer portal and NIL have caused more parity and it hasn't been such a monopoly amongst the SEC schools. I got to strongly disagree with that. If we didn't have the transfer portal, Alabama, they would have never had Jermaine Burton. They never would have had the chance to get Henry To'oTo'o a few years back. They never would have got Jamison Williams, who was a large part of them being able to make it to the national championship the year they lost to Georgia in 2021 when Bryce Young won the Heisman. You see, people thought that the portal and NIL were going to level the playing field. But all it's done is make it a lot easier for teams to have a lot of resources and a lot of money flowing through the program to remain on top. Alabama is on top mostly due to them using the transfer portal and NIL. Now, they're not overindulging in it. Alabama doesn't have to overpay for guys in the portal. Most of the guys that enter the portal that go to Alabama want to go to Bama. They send papers for Alabama to look at them and potentially consider offering them in the portal. Jahmyr Gibbs, for example, he wanted to go to Bama. And I'm pretty sure there's been other players who have hit the portal and tried to get into Alabama. Alabama doesn't really have to entice people to want to transfer to them. People already want to transfer to Bama because it's Alabama. They can develop you and they can get you into the NFL. But when you look at a school like Texas, who hasn't really had a lot of success prior into the last 2 seasons, they got a lot of money to spend. So if they have a top flight receiver that they want in the portal, they can offer him more money than what the majority of other schools are willing to offer him or what they have money to pay for. And you look at Georgia, Texas A&M, they got a lot of money to spend. Georgia doesn't have to use a lot of it because, like Bama, top players in the portal probably are begging to transfer to Georgia, begging for Georgia to take them. But Texas A&M, Ohio State, Michigan, with all the money that they have flowing through those programs, if there's a high-ranking player in the portal, they have the money based on their NIL collective to offer that player. When you think about what it's done to recruiting, I think that NIL has had more of a negative effect when it comes to spending on players coming out of high school compared to what the transfer portal has. If you're spending top money on a guy in the transfer portal, you're mostly spending it on a guy who's already proven, who you know is going to be able to come in and be an immediate contributor for you and have a major impact on you winning games. But when you're spending money on these high school players, you don't know how they're going to translate coming into college football. Look at Texas A&M. When they spend all that money on the #1 recruiting class, the highest ranked class ever, most of those guys aren't even with the program anymore. You see Jimbo Fisher and Texas A&M spent so money on just trying to get the best guys that they overlook character. And that's one of the negative aspects about NIL, is that you have potential controversies that can arise in the locker room. You have misunderstandings, such as the Jalen Rashada and Florida incident. Remember that? When he was offered a big NIL package, but when it was time for him to sign on the dotted line, Florida's NIL collective didn't hold up their end of the bargain, or he was promised things that they weren't able to deliver upon, and then he ends up decommitting and going to Arizona State. So I do think that when it comes to recruiting, NIL has made it to the point where just because you can buy all the top recruits doesn't necessarily mean they're going to play out or play out well, or they're going to be able to come in and deliver on the high expectations. You see, the NIL, when you're using for recruiting, is more like a dice roll. You spend $100K on trying to get the top 10 wide receiver in the 20-something whatever class. He comes in, he has some character issues. That's $100K down the drain. Meanwhile, you spend $100K on a proven wide receiver in the transfer portal. This is somebody who you can know can come in and have success right away. Using NIL when it comes to attacking the transfer portal is less riskier than using it to entice recruits to want to come play for you. And when recruits follow the money, obviously they're not going to be as committed, as dedicated, as more willing to work to stay and be a starting member of that team compared to players who commit to a school just because they love the school and they're not just chasing the money. Another thing that the transfer portal has really done that has hurt college football, outside of making this a bidding war and pretty much the college football equivalent to free agency in the NFL, is that it hurts the group of five. Okay, anytime you have a star player for a G5 school, I go to FAU. So let's say LaJohntay Western, who is our best receiver, who was an All-American this year, and he was one of the best receivers statistically in college football. If he was to hit the portal, because a school like Alabama and Georgia hit him up on the phone and said, hey, like, if you hit the portal and you transfer to us, we can give you a $200,000 NIL package. How are you going to be able to build up a G5 program at FAU if your best players just end up leaving for greener pastures and chasing the bag in the transfer portal due to a team having a stronger and bigger NIL collective than you? And why would you as a head coach even want to stay and coach at a G5 school for a long period of time and try to build that program up when you're going to have to fight just to keep your players on the roster, and then you're going to have to fight to get guys via recruiting and via the transfer portal? It makes it a lot tougher of a job if you're coaching at a school that always gets their top talent poached from them. That's why you see coaches like Mike Elko leaving Duke. I'm pretty sure Mike Elko would have loved to stay at Duke for a long period of time, but it's a lot harder to sustain success at a school like Duke because not only is it hard to recruit at Duke, but it's also hard to keep some of your best players from hitting the portal. Like, be honest, if Mike Elko would have stayed at Duke, right, and Riley Leonard hits the portal, that would have given him more ammunition to want to leave because it's like, damn, I'm at Duke and I'm willing to stay, but my star quarterback is getting offered more money than what we can pay to keep him, and now he's going to transfer. Look what happened to Washington State. Washington State lost Cam Ward. They didn't lose their head coach. The only thing that happened was that they now went from a P5 program to a G5 program now that the Pac-12 pretty much has disbanded. And Cam Ward, you look at the schools like Ohio State and Miami and the other schools that are in the mix to land him in the transfer portal, he's seeking a $1 million NIL deal via the portal. Washington State doesn't have the kind of funds to afford that. That $1 million that they will be giving to Cam Ward probably would be a large chunk of their recruiting budget. So Washington State, they can't keep up with the other big-time programs when it comes to NIL. So you lose out on a star quarterback in Cam Ward who potentially could help you continue to build up your program. So why would whoever is the head coach at Washington State want to stay at that program where he just lost his top quarterback due to NIL in the transfer portal? The transfer portal and NIL era of college football has been a major advantage to the Power 5 programs and the big boys of college football, and a major disadvantage to the G5. When it comes to the quality of good teams that we see out of the group of 5, the transfer portal and NIL era have made it a lot worse. You're not going to see a lot of Boise States or that 2020 Cincinnati Bearcat squad that got into the postseason. And even then, that Cincinnati Bearcats team that got into the playoffs, they were able to be successful because they were able to take 2- and 3-star guys, develop them for 2 to 3 years, and then they blossom into really productive players, such as Sauce Gardner, Kobe Bryant, who are now playing in the NFL, Desmond Ridder. And they got a guy like Jerome Ford from the portal, due to him not being able to get opportunities at Bama and finding greener pastures with Cincinnati under Luke Fickell. But in today's age now, and 2023 going into 2024, you're not going to have any more Cincinnatis that are going to be able to get 2-3-star guys in and be able to develop them for a period of time and then eventually have a good squad, because when those guys get even remotely close to being good, the bigger schools are going to come out there, hit them up and be like, hey, like, come play for us. We got $300,000 for you. Come transfer. You see, the players committing to the schools for money has been a large reason why the transfer portal and NIL get a lot of flack. Because now you can pretty much buy a guy from any school anytime you want to if you got the funds to do so, and it takes away from the smaller programs up there. It's a lot harder to build up a smaller school now than what it used to be a decade ago. You see, if Boise State was as good as what they were with transfer portal and NIL being such a big thing now, you wonder if Kellen Moore would have even stayed his whole entire career with Boise State. You see, like, for the Power 5 schools out there, transfer portal and NIL have made things a lot easier for you. Like, yeah, you're going to lose a couple of guys here and there that can't start, or maybe you got another school that may be willing to pay them more money to come transfer than what you're willing to pay them to stay. That's cool. But for a school like a FAU that I attend, it's really hard to build up a team that's good enough to even qualify for the college football playoffs. Like Tulane, they're going to get a lot of their best players rated not too soon, not too far in the near future. Just because if you're a program like Tulane that's pumping out great players every single year, Other teams are going to start to recognize, and they're going to start to work the phones and start leveraging what they have to offer those players from an NIL standpoint, and they're going to start using that to get those players to transfer out of Tulane. And I think to make the transfer portal and NIL a little bit more favorable for these G5 schools, the NCAA should implement a tampering rule. You're not allowed to contact any player unless they're in the portal. You got schools that are hitting up these players before the season even ends and say, hey, man, after the season ends, you need to come play for us. We got something ready for you. That's why you have so many transfers once the regular season concludes, because they've already been working the phone, talking to coaches, and getting deals done. And that's not fair to the smaller schools in college football. You see, everybody cares about G5 schools having the same opportunity as the other schools out there that are Power 5, but it just doesn't play out that way because they don't have the same access to funds and resources that schools like Texas A&M, Georgia, Ohio State, Clemson have. But overall, I do believe that the transfer portal has done more good for college football than it has done bad. Okay, yeah, regardless if you change the rules around, you're still going to have a massive influx of players that transfer every single year. You're still going to have players that chase the bag. Somebody suggested that they should have a salary cap. But the thing is that not every school has unlimited money. Ohio State, they got more money to spend than your average Power 5 program out there, but their pockets aren't as deep as what Texas is. Texas, TCU, and Texas A&M, they got the unlimited money glitch. They're never going to run out of money. They got billionaires down there in Texas at that university. So for a school like Texas, you put a salary cap on them, their salary cap is going to be a lot bigger than what a school like Ohio State's salary cap would be. Teams technically already have a budget when it comes to what they're willing to pay. And certain schools like Ohio State, they may not be willing to dish out a lot of money and NIL deals to get a wide receiver out of high school, out of the portal, if they already developed that position really well. But you see, it's just no matter how much you try to change the rules, the transfer portal and the NIL, name, image, and likeness are always going to be a big factor in collegiate athletics, no matter if it's college football or college basketball. But for college football, this has allowed for us to have more competitive football and other conferences not named the Big Ten or the SEC. Look how good the Pac-12 was because of the transfer portal, because of all of the great quarterbacks that schools like Utah, Washington, Oregon, Washington State were able to acquire. Hell, even Deion Sanders, if he didn't have access to the portal, Colorado probably wouldn't have even won a single game this season. So you guys let me know down in the comment section down below, do you believe that the transfer portal has done more good than bad? Has it made college football better, or has it made it worse?